Welcome to the SEB Inside Asia Christmas special, where we will try to identify 10 potential Asian surprises in 2025. My name is Fredrik Hahnel. I'm head of Asia for SEB, based here in Singapore. It's the 17th of December as we're recording this, and with me, as usual, I have my podcast accomplice, Yokota, head of Markets Asia for SEB. Hi, Sean. How are you doing today?
Hi, Fredrik. I'm all good.
Before we kick off with our 10 surprises, what's been going on in the Asian markets lately? There's been a bit of volatility in Korea, right?
Yes, we're having the Korean drama, the K drama recently. And it started with President Yoon. He decided to call martial law, and 6 hours later, he called it back. And as of this Saturday, he's been impeached. So, just to give him some level of credit, the opposition was blocking everything he was doing. So, it was very frustrating for them. Popularity was all time low. But I think from both supporters of both parties, it was a little too much to call martial law. So maybe he got what he deserved. But I think what this shows in the region is that if you look at the Korea's equity market, it's actually recovered everything from the day the martial law was called. Korean won, the currency is only down 2%. So I think it just shows you how far Asia's come in terms of institutions and democracy. That, of course, it's like your health. You get cuts and bruises and you get sick, but with the democracy institutions, you recover. So you have problems, but you get back on your feet. And this is what Korea has done. And so I think that's why the financial markets are not too upset about what's happened. How about you, Frederick? What have you been up to?
I just came back a few days ago from India, where I've been for a week, visiting New Delhi and Mumbai. And yeah, what are my impressions from India this time? It's a little bit slower than last time I was there, still very bullish and so on. But GDP came in slightly lower in the last quarter, some 5.4% compared to over 7% last year, right? And inflation seems to be eating into consumers' purchasing power a little bit. It's still over 6%. Interest rates have stayed high for 2 years, and politics is a little bit more divided now, of course, after Modi and his BOJ party won the election this year, but lost its own majority. So things are a little bit slower, but of course, it's still the fastest growing major economy in the world. We expect the growth to be over 6% for the coming years yearly. And our clients are still very bullish. Almost every company we met sees double-digit growth. And of course, with Indian GDP per capita at 1/5 of China, with BJP still being in power for the next 5 years, etc., I think there's still a lot of potential. Clients talk a lot about digitization, which is super fast in India, of course. Today, when you receive a salary or you make an application for a license, or you submit your tax returns, it's all being done digitally in India. And I think I mentioned in a previous pod that over half of, at least at that point, over half of all the digital payments in the world take place in India. So this, many people think, is also leading to more transparency, better service, and that, less corruption and so on and so forth. There's also a lot of talk about the Make in India policy that the government is pushing ahead with, which is forcing companies selling in India to also source and manufacture locally. However, we don't see a lot of new investments in manufacturing for exports or China plus one strategies happening in India, but it's rather the market itself that's sort of the attracting factor for our clients. I met companies in the healthcare sector or health sector that was very interesting, with medical equipment and that kind of business. They mentioned that they see, first of all, of course, enormous potential and growth in the underlying market, but also they see increasing health tourism going to India from other places such as the Middle East. People coming and paying a lower price for surgery and combining it with a vacation in India. It's quite interesting. And then, of course, I saw a lot of infrastructure continuing to be built at light speed, and in particular Mumbai impresses. It reminds me very much of Shanghai 20 years ago. People are very, very optimistic, forward-looking. Everyone is there to make money, and yeah, it's quite impressive actually. A place I can recommend for people who want to go to India and get a feeling for it all. And then finally, I think I should mention that there's also still a lot of talk about red tape, speed money, money that companies have to pay to get things done quicker, and of course also the latest quality control measures that make it more complicated to bring in goods into China for manufacturing, and of course that's quite negative for India's image. So that's my short travel report. Any comments on that from you, Sean, about India?
You were compared to like China 20 years ago, and when long time ago when you visit China, just by being there, you can feel that it's growing 15% or 20%. Is that how you feel when you're in India? That it's growing
Yeah,
10%?
if it's 10 or 15%, I don't know, but yes, it's the same feeling. And I think that people who have a view of India, whatever it is, I think it's important to go back. You have to go there to get an updated feeling and insight into what's really going on. So yeah. But should we move over to today's theme, the 10 surprises, Sean? 10 surprises in 2025. And if I just make an attempt to summarize the year that passed before we turn chapter in 1 minute, I would say it's been a year full of elections in the region, a lot of political changes. Let me see, we had an election and a new president in Taiwan, of course. We have a new president in Indonesia. We had the big election in India, the biggest democracy in the world. Modi stayed in power with a little bit sort of less power, of course, with not having its own majority. We have a new prime minister and a new president in Singapore. We had elections in Bangladesh and Pakistan. We had an election in Japan and a prime minister that stepped down. And then we had a bit of volatility in Korea, as you just mentioned. And then in China, of course, we have had the fourth year of the property crisis and a struggling economy with the booming exports business, and overall in general in Asia, I think still quite good economic growth. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, and I just wanted to add one maybe surprise from this year is that I think beginning of the year we thought, oh, maybe US could fall into a recession this year. And then the other one was like, oh, maybe China's going to recover back, coming further up into the growth. And then you mentioned to me this morning that if you look at China's 10-year yield right now, it's 1.7%, and US yield is about 4.5%. So that's kind of a future look into these countries. And it looks like markets are saying China's future doesn't look that great. US, you still get 2% deflation, 2.5% growth. So we've kind of come back in a completely different situation this year than where we started.
That brings us to the theme for today, the 10 potential surprises in 2025. And the way we will do this is that Sean and I have prepared five potential surprises each. And I want to stress that these are not predictions. They're absolutely not predictions, but rather surprises of things that could happen. And if they do, we will discuss a little bit what that would mean for Asia, for the world, and so on. And the surprises can be very likely, they can be highly unlikely, they can be modest or crazy. There are no rules. We'll try to get through all 10 surprises. We'll see if time allows. But we will also, of course, try to allow each other to comment on each other's surprises and say if we think they're likely to happen or if they won't and what it would mean. Okay, let's start. Sean, why don't you go ahead with your first surprise for 2025?
Sure. My first surprise, I'll stick to your India visit theme and talk about that there's going to be a big boom in Indian tourists around the world. And just like when you're at the beach in the ocean, first you get a wave, which may have been the Chinese tourist boom, but waves usually come in threes. So the next one I think you're going to get is this India boom. So according to the Economist, they think about 30 million people, Indians, are going to travel next year. So that's about half of the Italian population that's going to be traveling. And because of just visa things, they will probably spend 70% of the people will be in Asia, and then the 30% will be visiting other parts. But I think this is just the beginning. They're probably growing like 20% in terms of the tourism growth. So just by doing simple math, in 4 years from now, instead of half of Italy, entire Italy of Indians will be traveling around the world. So this is, I mean, it's a more of a base case, but I think you'll see more and more of that in your daily lives as you're walking around.
Great. And what do you think is the likelihood if you use a percentage between 0 and 100%?
So I'm kind of going against this. This is not much of a surprise, but base case. So I'd say this is more about 66, two-thirds percent, 66%.
Good. I give it 100%. I'm pretty sure you're right about this one. The only thing speaking against it is that the economist made the prediction. That's usually a bad sign. But I think that you can see this when you travel in Asia at airports. There's a lot of Indians traveling now. So I think this is a pretty good prediction for next year. So my first surprise is that the U.S. trade war with China and arguably with other parts of the world as well will turn from a tariffs and kind of tariffs agreements scenario to actually a currency agreement, and that there will be a Mar-a-Lago accord between the US and China, Japan, EU, Canada, and some other countries to try to devaluate or depreciate the US dollar as a means to reduce the US trade deficit. And this is because it becomes clear to US businesses and others that tariffs do more harm than good to the US economy, and that U.S. business interests are hurt. And of course, U.S. consumers as well, they have to pay the price for this. No one else will pay for these tariffs. This leads to higher inflation. This leads to higher interest rates, which creates capital inflows and a higher, a stronger U.S. dollar, and potentially still with trade deficits staying high. And in this scenario, Trump invites U.S. companies that have started to complain and invite them to Mar-a-Lago, and then he asks them, "What do you want?" And they say, "Negotiate with China and the others and make a deal." And I have been looking back in history to the famous Plaza Accord in September 1985, when the finance ministers from the U.S., West Germany, France, the UK, and Japan met up at the Plaza Hotel in New York to discuss ways of, bringing down the US dollar. And the situation in 85 is actually a bit similar to now, as at that time it was Ronald Reagan, who during his first term had launched huge fiscal stimulus packages. The Fed chair at the time, Paul Volcker, had raised interest rates to stem inflation. That had attracted capital flows and pushed up the US dollar. And this led to lobbying from the manufacturing industry in the US, uh, wanting the US to protect its interests. The US tried to punish Japan, which was the most, the country with the biggest trade surplus with the US at the time. And they gave them 60% tariffs on cars from Japan, similar to the 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs now, if you like. This didn't help, and when the negative prospects of trade restrictions became obvious, the White House began negotiations that led to the Plaza Accord. Uh, when the admittedly this surprise is becoming a little bit longer, but bear with me. At the time when the Japanese negotiators went into that hotel in 85, the Japanese yen had been trading at roughly 240 versus the dollar, and then just a few years later, it was down to 128. The dollar depreciated by 4% that particular day when they met, and then it continued for, I think it was roughly 25% over the next couple of years. It went so far that actually there was a new accord in 87, the Louvre Accord, where they tried to halt the decline of the US dollar. Anyway, here we are today. The US today stands for 40% of the world's global budget deficits. Let that sink in for a while. And then, if I'm correctly informed, it also stands for 60% of global trade deficits. And so, when the US launched the first trade war before COVID against China, the last time Trump was around, China, among other things, answered with a depreciation of the currency from 6.1 to 6.7. It was a 13% depreciation. That could be the tactics again. We're not sure this time. But anyway, if this the dollar continues to be this strong, this could be an issue, and this could be sort of what happens. And now the twist to this surprise is that the Plaza Accord, when it happened, and the rapid appreciation you saw of the yen at the time, has led some economists to say that that was the reason that Japan actually ran into trouble. After that happened, they started to, stimulate its economy with extreme monetary policies, extreme fiscal support, and that in turn created the huge Japanese asset bubble that later burst and led to the Japanese lost decade. So the question is, could this happen to China again? If this happens, what will happen to the carry trade with the Japanese yen? I think there are quite strong forces at play here if it happens, and the question is if it will happen and how China would reply. So,
Well, this is would be perfect for Trump. It's the ultimate deal of getting every superpower in one room and pulling out a piece of paper that's signed. So it's right up his alley. Um, I guess it's really a matter of the probability. So, uh, what kind of probability are you putting on this?
I mean, it all depends on the dollar, of course. If the dollar would depreciate by itself, this will not happen. If it would stay high, I think it's not totally unlikely that something similar would happen. That at least it will become some part of this. But at the same time, I'm not sure how China will play along because I think that China is much better prepared for this second chapter of the trade war. And I think the Chinese, when they look at this, they think that Trump, he's here for a good time, but not a long time. So they probably expect that after 2 years there will be a midterm election, and Trump's power domestically will diminish somewhat, and then so I'm not really sure how they will play this, but I think it's that the currency would become a part of this. I would say it's at least 40% in the likelihood.
I'm a bit more pessimistic than you, so I put it more around the 5%. Just because I think it's really hard to get all these countries in one room.
Well, fair enough. It's just a surprise and not a prediction, so I'm okay with your percentage on this one. Let's move ahead with your second surprise for 2025, Sean.
Sure. My second surprise is that Scott Bessent, who is the Secretary of Treasury nominee that Trump has picked, that he will be fired in the first quarter, so sometime in February and March. And I think this will have pretty big market implications because everyone's wondering which Trump will show up. One is the transaction deal type, where all his threats are just to get some kind of a deal. So it's just transactional and not very negative, maybe even positive. But the other one is kind of this permanent, I'm going to decouple from China, ideological. It doesn't matter what happens, we're going to separate. And Scott Bessent's name has come up, and he's kind of leveled it out that because he's more of a neutral guy, business guy, Wall Street guy, that he's definitely even headed, make it a transactional type. So tariffs aren't really, it's more of a means to an end than where things are going. So that's why markets have been calm, and all this Trump trade of a strong dollar, higher rates, they've kind of calmed down because of his nomination. But as you know, and everybody else knows, Washington, D.C. is full of politics and bureaucracy that if you're an outsider coming in, it's very difficult to navigate. And Trump wants a lot of things done right away. And so if Bessent isn't delivering, and I'm sure if Scott Bessent, when he was offered the job, that if he would be fired in the first couple months, I think he would know this, that it's a very high possibility. I don't think he'll be surprised. So if things aren't moving, I think he can be easily fired, and that would be a big move, negative movement for financial markets. That's my second surprise.
Okay, and what probability do you give this?
This one I think is relatively high as well, so I'd say about 25%.
I refrain from giving my probability. I'm not so good at American politics here, but but I do think that, of course, I agree with you that it will be much more difficult to deal with China than they may think. I think China is ready to fire back hard if need be. They are ready to make a deal, but if they feel that, I think you allude to, that the actual agenda behind the scenes in the US is something bigger, that they are actually not interested in a deal, they're more interested in holding back China, then of course, once China realizes that, they will also be pretty tough back, I think. So I think it's an interesting, not prediction, but an interesting surprise for that reason. Okay, but that leads us to my second surprise. It's also a little bit more complicated one, like my first one, but I'll try to make it shorter. My second surprise is that Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the BRICS countries, along with its new members from last year and some new partners this year, actually surprised the world by actually launching a new BRICS currency that is pegged to gold. It uses a blockchain-based payment system, and it's a fully digital currency. We discussed this in an earlier pod that these countries are very keen to break the dominance of the US dollar. I think we said that it is used for some 96% of international trade invoicing in the Americas. It's like close to 75% of international trade invoicing in Asia Pacific. And it's like 60% of all central bank reserves, and it's been used for almost all the world's oil trading. And central to all of this is, of course, the ongoing US-China trade war, as well as the US sanctions on Russia. And many countries in the global south feel vulnerable to US power to confiscate currency reserves, which they actually did in the case of Russia, or simply sanctioning countries, individuals, and companies, and limiting their access to the US dollar, etc. And on top of that, of course, you have these countries being very critical of what they feel is a very irresponsible monetary and fiscal policy by the US, spreading inflation around the world. And the BRICS countries feel that it's a good time for change. Now, a lot of analysts have written this off completely because they say that the BRICS countries are very different. They have different economies and very different interests. But at the same time, you can see that the Americans are not writing it off entirely. There seems to be a bit of worry, and I just wrote down exactly what Donald Trump said here a couple of weeks ago in a speech. He said the following: "We require a commitment from these countries that they will neither create a new BRICS currency nor back any other currency to replace the mighty US dollar, or they will face 100% tariffs and should expect to say goodbye to selling into the wonderful US economy." So I think this shows that they are concerned and they're ready to weaponize its economy. In reality, though, if you look at what's happened, as I think we talked about in an earlier pod, many of these countries in the global south have already started switching to their own currencies in trade with each other. But I think there are big limits to how far that can go. China's currency, the renminbi, is the only one that could potentially be big enough, but it's a semi non-convertible currency. It has a very underdeveloped capital market, and I don't think any other countries would be willing to be vulnerable to Chinese sanctions in the future by using the renminbi. So, I mean, there is a common interest in that sense. And I think the surprise here would be not that they launch a currency that competes with the US dollar day one as a reserve currency, but rather that they indeed launch the currency in one shape or form. And that this is the start of something, and then the big question is, of course, what Trump will in reality be able to do about it. That's a surprise. What do you say, Sean? What's the probability?
Maybe I'm too optimistic because it's getting close to Christmas or something, but I think this is actually a higher probability, especially naming something. Because from the US point of view, the way they always punish country is on the extreme end, you can go to war, military, or the other end has been this financial sanctions because the dollar has been prevalent in the banking system. But this has been tough to implement. So then that's why Trump started some tariffs as another way to coerce countries to do something. So countries outside of the US know that this is a weapon, and it's better to, if someone's using, a machine gun, then it's better to find some bulletproof vest. And I think that's what they're doing. So I think it makes perfect sense for BRICS countries to start this process. So, yeah, 30%, it's a good chance.
I'll give it something similar, 30-40%. I think that the goal, creating an instrument pegged to gold that gives you a return would actually be quite attractive as a safe haven investment product. And if you can if you can launch Bitcoin and Dogecoins and things that are very difficult for a lot of people to understand and they still buy it, I think there would be people buying BRICS currency as well. And I also think that it's quite difficult. Trump keeps threatening country after country with all these tariffs. I think after a while it becomes less of a threatening weapon in reality. So I think it's possible. I don't think it will compete with the US dollar for a long, long time, but the surprise here would be that they launch it next year, even though they're threatened by Trump in this case. Okay, great. Then we move on to what is it? Your third surprise, right?
Yes. So the next one is that the EU removes the 3% deficit rule. So 100%, there's no rules anymore. Government can spend as much and go into debt as much as they want. And I'm not thinking more that they have to spend on military or other things. It's just to change the economic model where last 10, 20 years, it's been China becoming the manufacturing factory of the world and US running its big deficits and kind of being the big consumer. And Europe has kind of piggybacked on China's growth and set up factories in China or selling machinery to make things in China. And that's how it's benefited. And now, because of these tensions happening between EU and China as well, I think it's good for Europe to diversify itself also. And the best way to do that is to, similar to China, you start to build a consumer base so that you're not just a seller, but also a consumer. And this will allow you kind of to diversify from China, also from the US. And like you said, maybe you don't need a Mar-a-Lago Accord. If Europe starts to spend money, then um, yeah, strong currency is actually good for them to import. So this is something I think Germany is kind of the one that probably needs to change the most on this. But yes, if it moves in that direction, I think it'll kind of just change the entire dynamics of the world economy.
Right. Interesting. What's the likelihood?
This one I'm very pessimistic. Especially removing it. Maybe they increase it a little bit, but yeah, these are old term things that it doesn't change very quickly. So I say less than 5%.
Okay, yeah, especially in Germany, I think, where it's going to be very tricky. But as a general sort of trend in the world, I think that's where a lot of countries are going, right? By spending more than they have, and with the U.S., what is it, 7% fiscal deficit? There is room in Europe, of course, to spend more. But yeah, I give it a 5% as well.
Yeah.
I think it's quite unlikely. But that leads me to my third surprise. It's kind of a little bit, at least. Related to this. My third surprise would be that a trade agreement between India and the EU actually suddenly sees a breakthrough and is signed. This is something that's been discussed for a very long time between India and Europe. And they've tried, they've negotiated, they've given up, they've taken it up again. And if this indeed would happen, I think it would have a pretty big impact on Europe. And I say it's related to what you just said because I think that if Europe goes deeper into a trade conflict with China and also has economic problems in Europe, Europe needs more, emerging markets, more big markets to offset the exports to China. And even though the exports to China is actually quite limited and the trade deficit with China is very big, but I think EU is in need of more growth markets, and here India comes in. Well, it's a democracy, so there's more of kind of I think support from European countries to cooperate with India, and it's a huge and booming market for many years to come. Now, when I was in Delhi, I actually met representatives of the EU delegation in Delhi and asked them, "What do you think is the likelihood that this trade agreement that you've been discussing for so many years with India will happen next year?" And they said is basically 0%. So my surprise here is that they're wrong and that it actually take place. And the reason I'm bringing this up is also because I remember when China started when China became a member of the WTO, it was a huge game changer, and a lot of foreign investments started coming into China. And as our Asia head of research, Eugenia, has said many times, India doesn't have many multilateral trade agreements. They have smaller bilateral trade agreements, while China has actually been much more prone to trade with more trade agreements. So it would be a breakthrough for India. It would be a breakthrough for EU if this happened. And my third surprise is that it actually starts to move next year. Comments?
So this was started a long time ago and then it stopped, but it regained once this U.S. China tensions picked up. So I think just like the China WTO entrance, a lot of these are political decisions. All the details are going to take forever to nail out. But when political will is at stake, these agreements can be just signed very quickly as well, I think. So yeah, but yeah, this year, next year, 25 is tough. So maybe 15%, I would say, higher than
Okay.
the EU delegates.
Yeah. So then I go. I'm a diplomat here, so I say 7.5% then between you and the EU delegates. Okay, let's move on. What is your fourth surprise for next year, Sean?
Yeah, this one I'm going a bit more negative on geopolitics. That has to be brought up. So the surprise is that a Russian sub appears in the water right next to South Korea and Japan, and this is tied to about the conflicts around the world. So it started with Russia, Ukraine, and then now it's spread to the Middle East. And in Asia, we've all been saying, oh, it's far away. We're not too worried about it. But now North Korea has sent about 10,000 soldiers to Russia to fight into Ukraine. So now this has kind of bled over to Asia. North Korea is involved. So this is somewhat of a concern. This is spreading. And so if North Korea is supporting Russia, how can Russia support North Korea? It can show its presence towards Korea and Japan as well. This is something I think even China may be a little bit upset about if it were to happen. But the consequences in this region would be extremely, extremely negative, even if it's an accident by that this happens. But everything is a domino effect and it's spreading. So this is something I'm concerned about that can happen next year.
I mean, this would be, moving in the direction of a World War III, right? It would be pretty scary if indeed it
Yes.
would happen. And how do you think markets would react if that happened?
Oh, this will be unlike the martial law called by President Yoon in South Korea. It's gonna be more than double digits. This will be very painful.
What is the likelihood? Please tell me that the likelihood is zero on this one, Sean.
Yeah, I'd say less than 5%. But this is one of those the black swans where very low probability but extremely high impact.
Yeah, I agree. Very interesting one. I think also there's low likelihood, but something to be aware of. How exactly it would happen, of course, it can be so many different ways, but something like that would be very, very scary. Thanks. Great. If I move on then with my fourth surprise, it's actually something similar. I mean, kind of also military tensions. My fourth surprise is that the military tensions finally erupt over Taiwan. The things that we have been talking about for so many years, every year, like let's hope that nothing happens in Taiwan in relation to China. But so my full surprise is that it actually does, and or I look back and I want to say the following: when Xi Jinping and Biden met at the G20 meeting in was it Peru recently, um, she clearly stated that there are four red lines that the U.S. can under no circumstances cross. Taiwan independence, number one. Number two, trying to unseat the Chinese Communist Party. And number three, harming China's economy. And number four, limiting Chinese access to technology. So Taiwan is highest on this. And obviously, everyone expects Trump to tread more carefully. He doesn't want to, get involved in other countries' internal affairs. He wants to, portray himself as a president of peace, etc. He thinks that Taiwan should pay for themselves for their defense and all that stuff, right? But I think this is more. Even if that's the way he will act, mistakes could still happen. It could be a fishing boat, a Chinese mainland fishing boat, trying to fish in Taiwanese waters. It stopped. A mistake happens and they sink, and people die. It could be a number of crazy mainlanders, nationalists, actually going to one of the many islands around Taiwan that belongs to Taiwan, and saying that, oh, we're proclaiming this is a part of Chinese territory, and whatever happens after that, it could be a Taiwanese citizen that is has broken China's anti-secession law that they cannot use on Taiwan, of course, but China has claimed that if someone proclaims independence in Taiwan, you're actually breaking the Chinese law, and we can prosecute you in China, and it could be a Taiwanese citizen being arrested in Hong Kong or traveling somewhere else. And taken to China, and that would, of course, lead to a big crisis. There are so many things that could happen here. If it happens, it would be very, very scary and negative. It could lead to blockades. It could lead to sanctions. And of course, one should remember here that the waters around Taiwan are extremely important trade routes. So the Taiwanese Strait, as well as the strait between the northern tip of the Philippines and the eastern shore of Taiwan, um, are where a lot of cargo ships pass through. So this would have a big effect, of course, on trading and the sentiment in general. And yeah, I don't know. China is becoming more and more active. You see quite frequently now that Chinese military planes are flying off the eastern coast, so on the other side of Taiwan, so this could happen if it's 2025. I have no idea. It could be much later, but that something would happen and heat up around Taiwan. Even it could even be, for example, even if Trump is in power and the Republicans dominate U.S. politics, it could be a Democrat actually visiting Taiwan, and Taiwan accusing the U.S. for letting this happen, and something could happen like that. So, what do you say? What's probability on my surprise number 4?
I think these accidents can happen quite easily. And I know from outside looking into China that people think she's authoritarian, so he has power over all these 1.2 billion people and everything they do. But I think if you ask Xi Jinping, he'll say, I can't monitor these 1.2 billion people. That's my biggest problem. And so, like you said, I think you can easily have these 10 people just go and try to do their own thing and take an island from Taiwan and just cause these problems. Kind of similar to this I don't know if I remember the balloon incidents that happened that flew over Canada and the U.S. I don't think that was planned. I think it was an accident, but it can cause a lot of problems. So yes, I think these things can happen. So probability, hmm, another 10%. Maybe I'm
I
too
would.
cautious.
No, yeah, I have no idea. I mean, I think that something would happen in the next 10 years is not at all impossible. So if I divide an 80% probability in the next 10 years, then it would be 8%. I don't know. I should be careful here because I don't have a clue. I think that the military experts should talk about these things. But our point here is that something can happen. And how serious it becomes, we don't know. But it's something to keep an eye on at least. And that moves us to our final surprises. So over to you, Sean.
Yeah, my last one, I thought I'd pick something a little bit different, and it's that there's going to be a esports Olympics inaugural event happening next year in Saudi Arabia, and this is to complement the Olympics. And the surprise is that this becomes a massive hit, maybe bigger than the Summer Olympics or the Winter Olympics. And so, as you know, like Winter Olympics and Summer Olympics happen every 2 years. So this is supposed to happen in between them to keep people occupied. And it's again, it's Saudi Arabia trying to change its economic model, relying on oil, trying to do something different. So they're going to host it every single year, every single event for the next 12 years. And so, yeah, this is going to be for the new generation, digitalization. It's trying to start something new to be on the forefront of technology for Saudi Arabia. And yeah, I think we all talk about geopolitical risks, and there's been quite a bit of war starting. So I think this is something positive that's happening, trying to bring countries together rather than war. So yes, something positive to end the year on a surprise would be nice.
Great. I agree. That would be very nice. And the likelihood, what do you think?
it is hard to compete against 100-meter sprints and figure skating and things. So bigger than the Olympics, yeah, it'll take some time. So 10%, I think.
But still something to keep an eye on. I find it interesting. I give it a 10% as well without thinking too much. But since you said 10%, I say 10% too. That brings us to my final surprise. Um, and that is that actually the significantly state-backed Chinese airline manufacturer Comac makes a serious breakthrough in 2025. Well, either by getting regulatory approval in several new emerging markets, or coming up with some new technology or something that we don't know about, and which would make it a very formidable future competitor to the two dominating companies, Airbus and Boeing. And this, if it would happen, would be the final piece of the puzzle in China's ambitions in the Made in China 2025 policy, where China had the ambition to be dominant as well as self-reliant in 10 different industries. Aviation is one of them. And this would be then on top of already being a dominant supplier of green technology like solar panels. I don't know what market share they have there, but it's been 80-90% of the solar panels sold to Europe, or bought by Europe, for example. Batteries, where China has some 70% of global manufacturing. EVs, we know they're very dominant in. They're making the world's fastest trains. They're producing over half the world's ships. And yeah, the surprise here would be that just like the world was very surprised after COVID at the automotive exhibition in Shanghai when they saw the new designs and how far Chinese EV manufacturers had come, that something similar, maybe advanced electric planes or something, would be presented by Comac, something we have no idea about today. And this would, of course, immediately lead to sanctions and export controls from the US and a new chapter of the trade war. But that's not part of my surprise here. But I think, if I look at what people say about this, I find Comac quite interesting. I think people should keep an eye on it. Experts that really understand this business, they say this is impossible. Manufacturing airplanes is complex. It's a sophisticated industry. There's a lot of security issues, and most of the engine and key components that Comac is using are actually imported, and it will take a long time to be approved by foreign authorities around the world, in particular in the US and Europe, where I think that the COMAC has also applied for licenses. Anyway, I think what speaks in favor of this is that the future demand of airplanes will be huge. You just see, constant increase of need. China's market itself is huge. If I remember correctly, it's becoming the biggest market in the world with roughly 250 operational airports. And the airplane C919, which is the equivalent of an Airbus 320. It's a single aisle commercial airplane. It actually flew its first commercial flight in May last year in China, and it's now used by China Eastern. It's used by Hainan Airlines. It recently got an order of 40 C919 jets by Tibet Airlines. They also ordered another 10 of its smaller aircraft, which is called ARJ21. And now, Comac is setting up offices in Hong Kong and Singapore to start promoting its two models and also offer services to other Asian markets. They have orders from, if I remember correctly, Brunei and Laos. They've already flown over Southeast Asian territory, etc. So I think this the surprise here would be that the world actually finally becomes more aware of Comac, that they're coming, not that they will outcompete the two competitors next year, but that something they come out with, some approval they get will surprise the world and uh, make the world realize that in the future probably Comac will be a very very strong player and a competitor. And I think that if you sit on a plane from London to um, South Africa 10 years from now by a South African airline, it may very well be a Comac. I think Comac would have the best potential in, of course, in emerging markets, etc. I realize this is something that I'm not an expert on at all, but I think that Comac is quite interesting and something to keep an eye on. So that's my surprise for next year. I give it a 5% myself before I leave you to comment on it, Sean.
I'm not an airplane person, so the one aisle is like when they have 3 seats on both sides. Those kind of airplanes, right? That's the size.
I would guess so. Yeah, it's a single aisle one. Yeah.
I remember like you and I visited Comac, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years ago, because they have a factory right next to the airport in Shanghai. And
Yes.
when you go into one, it looks like any other airplane. It's really hard to tell the difference. So whereas I was more surprised that it's not flying already all over the place. But like you said, I guess the regulatory aspect is a little bit difficult.
Yeah, and of course, the negative surprise of this would be that at some point there's a air crash, a plane crash or something on the way here. But yeah, I think it's interesting. Do you remember what it said on the walls when we walked through the factory in Shanghai?
I don't remember the Chinese word, but it was like you gotta suffer for many years to get to success, something like that.
It was some slogan that was quite funny. I don't remember either. Anyways, that was the final, not forecast, but the final surprise. Thanks, Sean, for great surprises and an interesting discussion. We are now only 1 week away from Christmas. What are your plans over Christmas and the New Year, Sean?
Yeah, I usually go to Japan. January 1st is the biggest holiday in Japan. And so I'm going to go see my parents in Tokyo and then go to northern Japan and Hokkaido to go skiing. And as usual, Japan has this weird tradition of eating KFC for Christmas. It's according to KFC, they said it started in the 70s because you couldn't get turkey in Japan, so foreigners are buying KFC, Kentucky fried chicken. And then, of course, KFC did a great job advertising that it's this. They had this slogan called "Kentucky for Christmas." Like back then, Western U.S. things were cool to do, so everybody caught on. Colonel Sanders, you can put some clothes on, make him look like Santa Claus. KFC's red and white, so they did a good job. So it's become a weird tradition. So that's what I'll be doing. What about you, Frederick?
Sounds great. No, I will go. I'll go back to Sweden with my family. It's the first time my daughter, she's 12 years old, the first time she celebrates Christmas in Sweden. So that's what I'll do and meet my family, my mother and my brothers and my old friends. So that's what I'm looking forward to. But
You
great.
should, you should bring a bucket of KFC fried chicken to
Yeah,
just add some Japanese flavor to your Christmas.
no, I think my wife and daughter will probably be very happy. So I wouldn't rule it out. If I mention it to them, that's probably what they will talk about all the time. So good. But with that, we've come to the end, and we thank everyone for listening in today. We will be back with new episodes of Inside Asia in the new year. And until then, we wish all of you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thanks and goodbye.